Welcome to this panel discussion on the practical implications, normative challenges, power balance concerns, as well as ethical issues related to accountability in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Susanne Arvidsson, and I'm Associate Professor in Finance with a special research interest in sustainable businesses here at Lund University. I will act as today's moderator. It has barely escaped anyone that across the world, governments, companies, civil society, organizations, universities, and individuals are engaged in the challenging work to reach Agenda 2030 and its Sustainable Development Goals. But who is responsible for our common sustainable future? What role does accountability play in the transformation towards a more sustainable world? And does a lack of accountability hinder the possibilities of reaching the Sustainable Development Goals? These critical questions were some that originated from a project initiated this spring by our PhD candidates enrolled in the Agenda 2030 graduate school at Lund University. This project involved an interdisciplinary research focus on the so vital concept, accountability. Two of the PhD candidates, Sushan Lee and Juan Ocampo, will give you a short summary of their project. Please, Sushan.
So thank you again for that introduction, Professor Arvidsson. And greetings. My name is Sushan Lee, one of the fellows of the 2030 Agenda program from the Faculty of Law at Lund University. My colleagues and I, part of the Accountability Working Group, are thrilled to have you here today. As one part of examining the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda Fellows identified different transdisciplinary concepts to examine from the 17 unique approaches and disciplines that we represent. The first theme was urban sustainability and management, which examined the idea of sustainable cities and urban planning. Accountability is the second theme, which forms the background and foundation of the panel talk we will have today. In designing the theme, we were inspired by the vision of the Agenda 2030 Graduate School, which includes identifying challenges and conflicting objectives, contributing new solutions, and generating dialogue and learning between different societal stakeholders. We started by looking at the definition of accountability as a construct of language. A common language definition of accountability is the fact of being responsible for what you do and able to give a satisfactory reason for it or the degree to which this happens. Now, continuing from that plain language understanding, we wanted to see how accountability as a concept would change in meaning and application when reproduced in different disciplinary contexts. So, we as a group decided to reflect the concept of accountability as it relates to sustainable development. What we needed next was a good question, one that would bring us together but not individually constrain us. The result was the following. How do the SDGs, or more broadly sustainability, increase and/or shape accountability in your field? We also came up with two sub-questions. The first was, how can accountability measures help prevent SDG wrapping or green, blue, pink washing? This sub-question struck at the core concern of the accountability and sustainability debate. Select dimensions of sustainable development are being held up as key factors for holding different stakeholders accountable. However, a lack of unifying standards of transparency and methodology in assessing that accountability has led to egregious abuse and misuse. To the extent to which the United Nations has urged precaution against the rise of empty or self-interested SDG declarations that distract us from the comprehensive and integrative nature of sustainable development. The second sub-question was, how can you fork the SDG framework through or in your field? this sub-question attempted to examine how sustainable development and the SDGs could encourage innovative thinking and solutions in different fields. The result of this activity was 12 unique reflections about accountability from 12 very different disciplines. While they embraced the unique characteristics and technical aspects of each discipline, through this reflection, we were reminded of a shared passion for sustainable development that binds us together. Now, in the words of Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the document that acts as our namesake, to free the human race from tyranny of poverty and want, and to heal and secure our planet. If we realize our ambitions across the full extent of the agenda, the lives of all will be profoundly improved, and our world will be transformed for the better. The entire compendium will be released in parts at our blog, agenda2030.blog.lu.se. Please do visit to read the compendium, as well as other research and writing about sustainable development from your friends at the 2030 Agenda Graduate School. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. And now Juan will give us some more details of the accountability project. Please, Juan.
Hello, Susanne. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Juan Ocampo, PhD Fellow at Agenda 2030 Graduate School and part of Lund School of Economic and Management. So, as Suhan explained, with Lina Van Doren, who is part of the panel talk tonight, we've been working for 6 months on the topic of accountability. Having discussed in our compendium what accountability was from each perspective, we thought that we could take further the discussion into a more creative and interdisciplinary frame. So to do that, we developed a 3-stage seminar. Based on the creative synthesis framework, we try to unpack the concept of accountability and observe different perspectives that connected sustainable development and accountability. But before we get into this, I want to ask you, what does Margaret Mead, lead figure in feminist anthropology, Norbert Wiener, one of the most influential persons in artificial intelligence, and Hutchinson, one of the also known as the father of ecology? Any idea? Well, besides being top of researchers in their fields, they were part of the Macy Conference in 1943. This conference brought together brave minds of the time to discuss their own problems and try to find new innovative solutions to the issues. So they encountered different problems. I think one of them was to deal with their egos, but something that they really had to deal with was the topic of language. Well, as one of them said, the conference interdisciplinary concepts could only be elaborated further and developed with the aid of a language that was more general for all. And so to approach this, what we did was we developed the first event of our seminar. In this event, what we did was to bring all the group together and try to discuss and unpack what each of us thought accountability was. So from this event, what we find out that was the word accountability included around 24 different perspectives of the fields that already Suhan talked about. And in this, we identified different patterns related to transparency, trade-offs, and leaving no one behind. The second step was a subgroup discussion to trigger sense-making processes. So now that we had some common language and some concepts, what we wanted is to trigger a discussion amongst the fellows to get a little bit in depth of what accountability was. So to do this, what we asked them was to think about the stakeholders that were involved in the accountability and what were the consequences of having accountability in the context of sustainable development. The third step was a final individual reflection. In this step, what we wanted was to get them to think a little bit about what the whole process and take this into a more meta reflection. So we asked 2 questions. The first one, what was that they learned in the activity, both in the writing exercise and all the discussion we had? And the second one was, what were the challenges that faced during this activity? This, of course, had a more, the objective of this question was about interdisciplinarity. So we could start thinking about where we could go in the future. So perhaps we're still a bit far from the Macy Conference, but this is a start, and we think it's a good start. So today, what you're going to see in this panel talk is one of the products of this interdisciplinary trial. So thank you very much, and we hope you enjoyed the panel discussion, and also keep in mind all the questions that we have been discussing through this presentation. Thank you, Susanne.
Thank you very much, Susanne and Juan. After finalizing their project, the PhD candidates decided that we need to organize a panel discussion focused on the role accountability plays in the transformation towards a global sustainable development. This, my friends, is the background for today's vibrant event involving a very competent panel. All our panelists have long experience of engaging in various issues related to sustainability. They do, however, represent different stakeholders and will bring different perspectives and viewpoints into our discussion on accountability. So let me introduce the panelists. Gabriel Wikström, the government's national coordinator for Agenda 2030. Ashley Allen, Chief Sustainability Officer at Oatly. Magdalena Bexell, Associate Professor at the Department of Political Science here at Lund University. Ana Maria Vargas, Director of Research at the Swedish International Center for Local Democracy and board member at Lund University Agenda 2030 Graduate School. Lina van Doren, PhD candidate at Malmö Academy of Music and also part of the Agenda 2030 Graduate School here at Lund University. She has also been involved in the accountability project. Some practicalities before we start. Considering the topic of today, I am sure that we could continue our discussions to well over midnight. This is, however, not the plan. We expect to end the panel discussion at around 6:30 p.m. To pose questions, go to www.menti.com and enter the code 30 50 30 and a 9. You can find the link and code also on the YouTube channel. So please do take the opportunity to pose questions to the panelists. We will address your questions in the end of the event. So panelists, are you ready? Yeah, you look ready. I would like to start with a fundamental question, and I'm addressing you, Gabriel, and also you, Ashley. What would you say is the ideal role or roles of accountability in promoting a sustainable development? If you go first, Gabriel.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for having me here, and thank you so much for the question. It's a tricky one, and I have thought about it a great deal. I would like to start with a historic perspective. Sweden is one of the countries in the world that has maybe come the farthest way when it comes to fulfilling many of the sustainability goals, if you compare it to most of the other countries. And the reason for that is not that we have been very active post the decision in the UN 5 years ago, but it is that we have done so many things during the whole of the 20th century. And I think that one key to our progress when it comes to equity, when it comes to environmental issues and so on, is that Sweden for a very long time was a very corporativistic society, where we had a close collaboration between the market, the state, different organized interests and so on. And this has really created a culture in Sweden where different interests and different actors are prepared to do their share to fulfill the greater goals and so on. And I would also say that the reason for why Sweden is lagging behind in some areas is that we have lost some of this culture. So the answer to your question is really that you need to create an environment, a culture, a society where different actors not only feel the responsibility, but where they have to compare themselves to others and have to discuss with each other where the boundaries goes between different types of responsibilities and how to see how they could really be a part of the bigger picture. So that would, an ideal would be to create more of a corporativist model. And I know that this concept is not a very easy one. It's difficult and problematic in many ways, but I think that the 2030 agenda is really heading it's pointing in that direction. And we need to see how could we update the model for the 21st century.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. Ashley, would you like to continue with your reflections on the question?
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure, especially for many of you who are based at Lund University, you probably know Oatly well, and so I don't have to really tell you who we are because we're in your backyard. But for those of you maybe joining from elsewhere, Oatly is an oat product company. We're known mostly for our oat milk products. And if you ask our CEO, he'll tell you we're a sustainability company. So clearly this topic about sustainability and accountability is a core value for us and really close to us. And we were founded in the 1990s based on research at Lund University and then have grown into a global company since. I like what the graduate presentations that were shared earlier highlighted that what is accountability? How do we sort of define it? And one of the terms that really stood out to me is responsibility. So to me, that's how I understand accountability is, what is your organization's, your individual, your government's responsibility for delivering on some of these big existential issues that we're all facing and that are really encompassed in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And for Oatly, the way that we look at what is our role, what is our accountability on sustainability and to promote sustainable development, for us, it really appears in the action. So it's not just about words, it's not just about making a commitment, although commitments are, of course, important. It's not just about setting a goal, but it's really then about following up, taking action toward those goals, showing and demonstrating, sharing with the world what that action is, and then measuring and just being transparent about what kinds of progress or challenges you face. And I think it's really important when we think of sustainable development and the role of accountability that we don't only look at transparency and accountability around the progress, but that we also are willing to share and learn from the challenges. So, for Oatly, where we really look at our role is especially in relation to climate change. And we really hone in on that sustainable development goal and looking at the role of plant-based eating in solving the climate crisis. And so for us, how we would see our role in that in terms of the sustainable development goals is being very transparent and measuring, what is our impact on climate, sharing that journey and sharing our results with our customers, with our fans, with our employees, and then continuing to follow up on that progress, on that journey over time.
Thank you very much, Ashley. And both of you talk about these strong people's voice and also collaboration, that is a key word when it comes to reaching Agenda 2030. I would like to address obstacles. Could accountability also be an obstacle in the process of reaching sustainable development. And I would like to address this question to Magdalena and also to Lina. Magdalena, would you like to go first? Are there any obstacles related to accountability and responsibility issues?
Yes, thank you. Well, overall, I would say, of course, strengthening accountability is mainly a positive thing. But if you want me to mention some possible obstacles, there are two I would like to highlight. So a first one can be an exaggerated indicator culture. So if there is too much attention to measurement and quantitative indicators at the expense of qualities that are more difficult to measure. And we know this from research on the Millennium Development Goals, that the quantitative indicators had strong steering effects in terms of where resources were spent and what issues were at all spotlighted during the era of the Millennium Development Goals. And therefore, we have to be careful now with the SDGs, looking, for instance, at SDG number 16 on peaceful and inclusive societies. There is one sub-target on the ambition to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions. And if we look at the indicators for this target, they concern government expenditure and the proportion of population that is satisfied with public services. So clearly we have to always also keep the broader qualitative aspects of any of these goals in mind, because when we look at follow-up processes around the Sustainable Development Goals, there is a lot of attention to the role of indicators right now.
Do you think do you think that that is a common problem with the indicators? That they have not been thought through that much, in what direction they are steering us?
Well, they have been thought through a lot, and in the case of the SDGs, there is a global indicator working group. So there is also some politics around the development of indicators. But I think we live in an evaluation society today, both internationally and domestically. And this both has strengths and weaknesses.
Lina, would you go elaborate on the obstacles related to accountability?
Yes, well, I can very much relate to what Magdalena has said earlier on the quantitative indicators and a risk of when looking at it from an average point of view, then you risk losing people in that process, like minorities and indigenous people who are not in that mainstream or not in those averaged numbers. But I think another obstacle may come with a certain kind of power or a regulated space that may be created to reach certain goals. And it becomes an obstacle for sustainable development if those goals are not convergent between the interests of the different stakeholders that are involved. So, I mean, I can give an example of the perspective from my former role as a music teacher in the education system. There are different accountability mechanisms there that monitor the quality of education. And I mean, this could be an inspection visitation, but they also exist in the form of standardized testing for schools and global rankings for higher education. And these standardized tests and these rankings, they can be valuable tools, but they also form obstacles. I mean, accountability for SDG 4, which I am concerned with, is about quality education. And it's not merely limited to acquiring quality in education. It clearly sets an aim in Target 4.7 that sustainable development and global citizenship is to be part of this quality education. And actually, not only SDG 4 is relevant, like 13.3, the goal for climate change is also addressing education. And in fact, all of the SDGs can be addressed through education. But looking at examples of these large-scale standardized testing, I mean, they could undermine the quality of educational experiences in terms of relevance and diversity. I mean, they focus on results of education, and they simply cannot take local differences and needs into account of individual students. So they could even mask the extent of inequality and disparity in countries. They could also encourage a teaching to the test mentality, which could cause exclusion or even a convergence in curriculum development. So we can already see like outcomes of this right now, where in many countries, and including in Sweden, subjects like music and physical education in the curriculum, they are cut down or totally eliminated in favor of subjects that allow for measuring this quality, like Magdalena was indicating, through standardized testing. Through numbers, things that can be measured. So ignoring important aspects of learning, such as values and attitudes that don't necessarily lean them towards like measurements, evaluations. And I mean, like I said, there are advantages of following up in numbers, like for target 4.6 in numeracy and literacy. But the consequence of these tests as a sole accountability mechanism might result in an education or a written curriculum that does not always align with the vision in SDG 4.7.
Thank you so much. And you see, there are really complex issues related to accountability. Actually, Magdalena, we have a question from the audience to you. You started out saying that you could think of 2 obstacles, but you mentioned one. And this... I don't have a name of the person asking the question, but do you mind expanding on the second obstacle? Could you do that?
Yes, sure. I didn't want to take too long. Well, a second obstacle might be that already during negotiations on a new political agreement, politicians may be hesitant to adopt binding, ambitious goals if there are strong accountability measures attached. And we saw that clearly during negotiations on transforming our world, the key document of the 2030 agenda. So just knowing that there will be accountability measures attached to a certain policy or decision might be an obstacle for the very creation of such accountability measures.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. And Anna Maria, we have talked about obstacles. Do you have any examples of how these obstacles can be mildred, or do you have any ideas of how we can try to minimize the obstacles?
Yes, thank you, Susanne. So I think until now we have been talking about accountability as responsiveness, as being responsible towards the goals. But I want to talk about accountability as sanctions, not just as nice wishes from the corporations or from some governments that want to do something good, but as citizens' ability to hold those companies and those governments accountable. Because the example that Gabriel put about the Swedish state sounds like a beautiful fairy tale, but for more governments around the world where I work, this is not the case. We don't have everyone in society working towards the goals, but instead we relied on democracy. So I'm going to talk about how we can use democracy to hold those companies and those governments accountable. And I have 3 ideas of the things that we work with local governments. The first one is that we need to make sure that the agenda is not something that we just sign as a wish, but it has to be translated into institutions at the national and at the local level. It has to be a rights-based agenda, something that citizens can go to courts and claim the rights. It has to be something that we can't measure not only through indicators, but through the actions of individuals claiming the rights. The second thing is that we should use, make sure that we could use also informal institutions. In many parts of the world, the formal institutions, which could be the courts or voting, don't work so often. So people often don't vote because they think it's corrupted, or the courts not necessarily work towards that extent. So we could also use informal institutions. And I have seen in my work how, for instance, to give sanctions or to give rewards to those companies and those governments that are working towards the Agenda 2030. And sanctions are often, for instance, gossiping about those that are not working towards the agenda. And those are informal mechanisms that work on everyday lives. So we need citizens at the local level to be able to engage and to know about the Sustainable Development Goals. But we can also give rewards to those good companies and those good governments that are working towards that. We should exalt their work and we should support them. And the final thing is that we work a lot with something called social accountability. And that is that we work with civil society organizations that ensure, for instance, that the rights of those minority groups that Lina mentioned are being able to be upheld. Those citizens may not have the possibility themselves to go to court or to hold their governments accountable, but we should work with those society watchdogs to help us to make sure that those in power are responding to the agenda. So I think it's not only about good wishes, but also about sanctions and holding them accountable and engaging the citizens.
Thank you very much for addressing how these obstacles can be minimized. In our different organizations, this is a question for you, the corporate level, Ashley. In our different organizations, we have clear structures of responsibility and can often easily identify who is responsible for a certain project and the outcome or failure or success of a certain project. Would you say that there is a need, or is it even possible, to adopt or refine these structures in an Agenda 2030 context? How are you working in your organization, and not just in Oatly, but in your industry? How are you working with the 17th goal and addressing this collaborative thing?
Yeah, well, I think for each organization, whether it's government, and my career before corporate sustainability was in the U.S. government. So whether it's in government or whether it's in companies or whether it's NGOs, clearly these organizational structures are important in order to ensure that everyone knows what their role is in being accountable toward big goals, really whatever the goals may be, sustainability goals or otherwise. So that's clear. I think, in each organization, though, that structure might look different. So in Oatly, what we really try to do is more of an organic approach. So, we set sustainability as a core value. We map out with the Sustainable Development Goals, and you can find this one version of it in our 2018 sustainability report. There'll be a new version coming out soon. We map Oatly against the Sustainable Development Goals that are relevant to our business and try to sort of unpack a little bit, how are those goals relevant? What are we trying to deliver in relation to those goals? And then a bit on our sort of progress or our challenges along the way. So that, sort of being transparent so that everyone in the company can see why does Oatly matter? How does Oatly connect to these goals?
But do you also assign responsibility to the different kind of goals or the different?
Well, so that's what I was gonna say. We don't assign responsibility; it's more organic. So we assess where we fit, and then we engage coworkers in more of a dialogue throughout the company to ask, where do you see in your job, what's your contribution to these goals? Where does your role fit, whether you're in sales, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in production, you work in one of our factories, where do you see your contribution fitting toward these goals? And have that as more of a conversation. And then each year we measure our committed coworkers, we call it. So we do a survey of all of our coworkers and say, how is it clear to you how you contribute to the sustainability goals through your work. Do you feel committed in this space? Do you feel like you're given the resources and the space in order to do this work? So for Oatly, it really is that organic approach that works for us. And in other organizations, it might be different.
Thank you very much. To the audience, I would like to remind you that you can post questions. We have a lot of questions coming in, but please post more questions to the panelists. I would like to address a question to the Swedish Agenda 2030 coordinator, Gabriel. What would you say are your most important role in promoting the implementation of Agenda 2030 in a Swedish context? What are the main challenges that you are facing?
Well, I think that the main challenges that I am facing, or the Swedish society is facing, is, of course, that we have, like many other societies and countries around the world, we have promoting a short-term perspective in more sectors of the society. And I think that this current pandemic has shown really how far we have gone from our past, where we had, a more long-term perspective. It was a part of the Cold War and the preparation for the disaster every day. And I would say that to turn this perspective around is the most difficult thing. And in that we need to pose a lot of difficult questions, and also do things that will really hurt, well, the system that we are so precious about. And one of the most important one is to discuss the economic framework for the Swedish municipalities. It's something that we have been very proud of in Sweden, because we say that, look, we have, when many other countries have had their economic crisis recently, and it has been a disaster for their societies, we have in Sweden pointed to these frameworks and said that, well, this has really helped us through the crisis. This has really helped us not going into recessions and so on. But you cannot only have a system to prevent different crises of the crisis of the past. You need to design a system, an economic system, that will really help you to prevent the mother of all crises that we're heading towards when it comes to climate change and likewise. And so we really need to change, the economic system. We really need to pose a lot of difficult questions, and that is really the hardest task for me as a national coordinator.
Thank you very much. Magdalena, you recently co-authored an article on the engagement of national parliaments in the work for the Agenda 2030. In this article, you concluded, and let me quote, "There is a weak involvement of the Swedish and Ghanaian parliament in policy making related to the Agenda 2030 thus far." What do you want to forward to Gabriel Wikström in order to accelerate this policy-making work? Do you have any good lessons for Gabriel to go further with?
We wrote that article, I and a colleague, Kristina Jönsson, last year, and we noted increasing involvement of parliaments, but very slow. So the two countries we looked into, Ghana and Sweden, had both been quite slow in activating their parliaments in work on the 2030 agenda. Both have had quite strong government ownership of the agenda that far. So in Sweden, it's been the institutionalized referral system with commissions of inquiry and the delegation for the 2030 agenda, where this integration into Swedish policy and debate has taken place. But This is changing now as the Swedish government has submitted a bill on the 2030 agenda to Parliament. So I think later this fall we may see some parliamentary debate on that government bill. But this is almost 5 years now into the 15-year period of the 2030 agenda. So this has been slow development, and I think it's easy to agree that some political ownership by Parliament is necessary for such a long-term ambitious agenda. So I would like to forward that we should recall, and we should not be afraid to acknowledge, that the SDGs are about politics and goal conflicts, and we should not forget the role of political institutions and even party politics when making long-term decisions that may require difficult trade-offs. So yeah, there are a lot of stakeholders involved, but voters have a special role in this long-term decision-making, I think, through Parliament and for holding governments accountable.
I see you, Gabriel. You wanted to add something or comment?
Yeah, just a brief comment. I totally agree with you, and I think that to understand the Swedish society, we can't only look at the formal institutions like Parliament or government. We really need to, as you're pointing to, look at the political parties. And the political parties, they haven't shown real leadership when it comes to the 2030 agenda. And I'm saying that being a former politician. And I think that is really if we don't change that, we will have a situation where the political parties and the people are separating more and more, and we will have a division that finally will become very tough to bridge over. I think that one of the tasks not for me but for the Swedish society is to see how could we organize people and mobilize people for the 2030 agenda, because the people, at the end of the day, the people are the only ones that could make or create a pressure on the political system and on the political parties so that we could keep focus on the year 2030 and to do all the difficult tasks that lays ahead of us. And I think that Greta Thunberg and the movement Fridays for Future, they have really shown that it is possible, but we need to upscale it to really make it happen.
So the voice of the people needs to be addressed also into the parliament and to the politicians.
Yes. Today, in theory, this should be done through the political parties, but the political parties had gone too weak, lost a lot of members and a lot of they have lost many of their roots. So the system is in that way broken, and we need to find new forms for involvement for ordinary people in not only in party politics, but in politics in general.
Yeah, so strengthen the link between the community and the politicians is one way for addressing these problems that Agenda 2030 might not be that prioritized. Okay, thank you very much. And Ashley, a question for you. What would you say are the main operational and also accountability related challenges facing a company like Oatly with a business model that are primarily revolving around a sustainability image or a core of sustainability?
Yeah, I think two challenges jump to mind. One is growth and the second is control. So when you talk about Oatly, this isn't true for every company, but when you talk about Oatly, a disruptor company that's growing, largely because of our sustainability approach and our sustainability mindset growing so rapidly, like 80–90% growth a year for the last several years, it becomes difficult to sort of balance accountability against what? You know, our context is constantly changing. A few years ago, we had one factory in one country. Now we have 3 factories in 3 countries and 14 co-manufacturers. In a couple of years, we may have 9 factories in 8 or 9 countries. So that context is always changing, and you have to constantly redefine what is your role, what is your sort of baseline that you're working against, what is your footprint on the world that you're trying to measure and really change. So that's one. And at the same time, you want to continue to rapidly grow when you're a disruptor company that's providing solutions for problems like climate change. So you don't want to do anything that's going to tamper that growth. The other one is control. So I mentioned, 14 co-manufacturers throughout the world. When you're talking about, your own organization, your own company, and the things that you can change internally in your operation, you have quite a bit more control over that. You can see the data, you can talk directly to the people, you can set their objectives and look at their performance. You can measure your factory performance. When you're relying on partners to do this work for you, whether it be co-manufacturers, suppliers, others, then it takes some additional steps. You have to work through incentives and disincentives. You don't always have access to the data you need and things like that. So, it's something that I think most organizations face, and with better data and digitalization, we're finding ways through it. Also with more consistent expectations from companies and governments to start having everyone as part of this process to work towards sustainable development. Those expectations are helping some of the organizations that maybe wouldn't be the leaders in this space to start to get used to understanding what their role is and what their expectations are, but it still just kind of adds to the challenge.
Thank you very much. And I know that everyone here is a bit curious about your views when it comes to accountability in the perspective of Blackstone's investment in Oatly. And we have also a question here that relates to that from the audience. How does Oatly relate to the matter of responsibility in the way they finance their company? How is that critique useful for the way they take responsibility as a sustainable company? It's a bit of the act of balance that you...
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think for those who aren't familiar, which is probably few, a couple of months ago, we announced a new investor joining the swath of investors that already exist for Oatly, Blackstone, which is a huge US-based private equity firm. And I think it's really amazing and promising the discussion and conversations that partnership spurred over sustainability and finance. What's the role in finance of delivering the sustainability goals? What responsibility does finance have towards shifting from funding, on a spectrum of dirty versus clean, more clean investments, more environmentally responsible, more socially responsible investments, and fewer irresponsible investments. So it's really been a great discussion and something that needs to be focused on more. I think for us, that partnership was really about 2 things. One, it was about attracting the level of investment that we needed at the size we needed and at the speed we needed it in order to continue to grow based on the overwhelming demand that we have for our products. So to really sort of enable us on our growth journey. But the second part of that decision and that partnership really was more intentional with Blackstone. So the opportunity that Blackstone was looking for an investment with a sustainability focus, looking for an example to add into its portfolio where it could sort of test that theory that sustainability investments are the right investments to make. Those are the longer term, more secure, more profitable investments to make. And it's a test. It's a really important journey to go on with them and to show through Oatly's example that, yeah, leading with sustainability does not have to be in the absence of or against profitability, in the absence of growth or holding back growth. It actually can accelerate growth and accelerate profitability. And ultimately, that's not just about Blackstone, right? I mean, this is about the urgency of sustainability issues like climate change. This is about accountability, not just for the organizations that are willing to step up and make green commitments or step up and share their reporting and share their progress toward global goals. It's about every organization, every private equity firm, every individual having to have a role in this and finding out what that role is. So that's really how we see that partnership.
So after taking this decision, is it the right, would you say, maybe it's too early to say, was it the right decision to take up this kind of collaboration with this company, or was it necessary to be able to continue to grow? Is that like the key essence of why?
I think asking, well, first of all, yes, clearly too early. Don't even know if the money has gotten into the accounts yet. It takes some time. But asking if it's the right or wrong decision makes it sound like these issues are black and white, and they're so clearly not. I mean, you can ask the same question of the other investment that we took, which was a green fund or an ESG type loan. Was that the right thing to do, to take the money as a loan with green attributes that we have to report on? Who knows, right? Like, there are multiple different ways to approach these topics, and we can't just pick one solution. We have to be going all, full cylinders on all solutions that we can see if we're going to be able to meet these really ambitious goals.
Thank you very much, Ashley, for that. We have a question for Lina. As a PhD candidate, you are literally in the middle of an educational system. What challenges do you see in accountability approaches within the educational system?
I think accountability has to be reciprocal. And in response to what Gabriel has said before, like connecting with the community, I think education can play a very big role there. But essentially, in education, it starts with the governments, but it involves so many more people from the public and the private schools down to the actual individual students like me and the younger students that I've taught as a music teacher. So we, in some way, are in direct contact with each other. And in that sense, this shared responsibility is quite transparent. Like what Ashley was saying, the roles that we play there, they are quite clear. What is expected of whom in the smaller context of a school, but it becomes much more complicated, let's say, when working with policies on a national level. So accountability as a means to promote good quality education could be adapted to include more qualitative and contextual data that complements the current accountability mechanisms for quality. So I think trust needs to be established in both directions. And this could start with policy processes that are established in dialogue with, the different actors involved and that can respond to the different needs of these stakeholders. I mean, it's very complex, of course, but I want to maybe what I want to say is that my idea rests on a notion that there is more to it than just a top-down, one-size-fits-all accountability mechanism. And another thing that comes to mind is that, I recently I visited a webinar organized by Stint, where I actually learned that SDG 4 was least represented in Swedish higher education and research among all the other SDGs. So that is that it was explicitly mentioned. Because in my job as a PhD student now, I've started to read a lot about these things, and discourses in music education research in Sweden, but also elsewhere, they include many of the values that actually can be found in SDG 4 already. And they stem also from the curriculum for compulsory education, like inclusion and diversity, working with an intercultural music education, democracy principles in the classroom, gender equity questions, rethinking education for the common good, and more. So I think especially, but not only, when working with a highly diverse student body, these questions are really important to address. And I think that, they can play a big role. They are part of the community, yet they are not actually given a political vote yet. So they cannot yet influence the politics in that way. So I think that it's important that education can form a platform for them where they can act, where they are given a chance to participate in the process towards sustainable development. So I think it's some sort of top-down meets bottom-up approach, I guess, towards accountability.
Thank you very much. Anna Maria, I saw that you were nodding. Gabriel and also Lina, you have touched upon the community and the voice of the people. The citizens, how can they hold their local governments accountable to reaching Agenda 2030, with seeing that Agenda 2030 is like a global agenda? Do you have any ideas on that?
Yes, I think that it's very important that we mention the citizens, as you said, and it's really great when Gabriel and Lina mentioned them, because of course, for this agenda to be successful and to reach these goals, we need that all citizens are on board. Where we work, which is with local governments in many different countries, including in Sweden, we have realized that there is very little knowledge among citizens, but also among local government officials and among politicians. So I'm not surprised that we have low knowledge about the Sustainable Development Goals at the local level with the local politicians, when I hear Magdalena saying that it is even this low engagement at the national level. So we need to make sure that we create more knowledge about the Sustainable Development Goals. It feels somehow a little bit late since 5 years have passed. We should not be right now in the moment of raising awareness. This should have been done a little bit earlier, but better late than never. So we should continue creating and this knowledge. But then we not only should create this knowledge among the politicians, we should engage with the citizens. And how do we do that? So we work a lot with partnerships. So this also relates to the SDG number 17. We should partner within local governments. We create partnerships between local governments in Sweden and local governments in other countries. And in that sense, the other local governments that come to Sweden have been inspired, actually, but some of these politicians, for instance, in the city of Malmö, where they are really engaged and they have been able not only to have these goals at the overall level, but they try to use them in their daily activities. So they see inspiring examples, and sharing that knowledge is important. But we also need to create partnerships with other organizations that represent civil society groups. As Lina said, not everyone can vote, at least child and youth not necessarily can vote, but their needs should not be unrepresented. So we need to ensure that they are also represented, and working with civil society organizations, community-based organizations, not necessarily NGOs, but organizations that represent these groups. It's an important mechanism, I believe.
Thank you very much for those very, very good tips and tricks on how to try to engage. And I think that that is something that we really see at the university, the engagement from the students and also to younger. I have a son of 5 and a daughter of 9, and they are really engaged in this, not just because of my research, but sometimes I also learn a lot from them, and that is the hope, the new generation. And I think that it's good to also go back and read the quote in the Brundtland report, Our Common Future, what it's all about. That is something that we need to remind ourselves with. We have a question here from the audience. Overall, do the SDGs contribute to increasing responsibility, accountability of governments and companies, or are the negative effects of cherry picking and SDG washing legitimizing non-sustainable behavior. Do any one of you feel that this is a question you would like to address? Magdalena, you look, ready. So please start, Magdalena.
That's, of course, a very hard question to answer on balance. But what I would like to say is that the 2030 Agenda contributes a holistic approach to sustainable development in all its dimension, social, economic, environmental. And that there was great political momentum around that holistic approach in 2015 when the agenda was adopted. So I think that is a contribution made by the SDGs, which challenges the way many government administrations operate. These are often quite silo-based structures, both in terms of how government is arranged, but also in terms of parliamentary committees and how issues that go across issue areas are hard to deal with. And I have interviewed Swedish parliamentarians who have said that, yes, the 2030 Agenda is difficult to take on in Parliament because it's so cross-cutting. So I think this is an important challenge.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. We have another question here, and I would like to start with saying that this person, his name is Alex, he says, wonderful panel discussion. So that's some encouragement for you before the question. Hello, could you please give 1 or 2 recommendations for strategies on how civil society can hold governments and business leaders accountable? So this is how to make the voice stronger. Do we have anyone feeling up to it? Gabriel?
Well, I think that is an excellent question. And I would say that civil society needs to be better organized themselves. Because many times I find that civil society organizations act independently of each other, and not even organizations that are really close in perspectives, in aims and so on, are really collaborating in a way to change policy or change the equilibrium in politics and so on. And the reason for that is, of course, that they are competitors in many ways. And I would say that this, as long as they see each other as competitors, and as long as they do not organize in better ways, their voice in the political discussion and on the 2030 Agenda will be weaker than it should be and than it could be. So that is my advice, really, that you need to go together in more ways than you do today.
So the strength in collaborating, that is really important. And that is also why we have the goal number 17, and not to forget that this is not something that we need to succeed in ourselves. We need to have a joint success when it comes to reaching Agenda 2030. Anna Maria, you were waving a hand, please.
Yes, I want to compliment what Gabriel says. I think organizing better is great, but many times it's difficult, and in many countries it's not even possible because you are afraid of retaliation from those actors that are in power. So there is something called informal politics. And informal politics is about everyday citizens' actions that are political in a way. And I think what Greta Thunberg did was informal politics. And we need more informal politics. We need to engage in these day-to-day activities. Citizens not always have the time and opportunity to join organizations and to have social movements. So how can these civil society organizations spark these everyday and informal politics? I think this also is important.
Thank you very much. Ashley, you would like to comment?
Yeah, and I think both of those comments were great. So I'll just add from the corporate perspective. I think, don't underestimate the power of your consumer choice. So demand from the companies that you buy products from, that you use services from, demand that, one, that they're actually working toward these goals, and two, that they're telling you what is their impact, what is their footprint on these goals. So for example, we're working to put carbon footprint labels on all of our products, either labels or online. Demand that information from the products that you use. Demand to know where is investment coming from for these products, for these companies. I think that's just really, really important, and gives you then the power to actually make choices based on that information.
And that is also why knowledge is so important in this case, because it is difficult to know what you are going to buy when you are in a grocery store. Should you at least buy something? Should you buy a soap, or could you buy tomatoes now when we do not have them fresh in Sweden? Or should you? So I mean, it is difficult to be that individual trying to make a positive footprint. So we need guidance, we need knowledge, and I think that is an important step. Lina, you waved your hand, and also Gabriel. Lina, would you make a comment?
Yes, I also wanted to say something about the role of the arts in society, and arts has been used as a form of criticism towards governments before as well. I mean, think of the protest songs with relation to the Vietnam War, or the civil rights movements, where music was used by people who were oppressed in order to express themselves. So I mean, visual art, music, media as well. I think we should not underestimate that power. And Bill McKibben in 2005, he actually wrote an article like, where is the arts on the climate crisis? Yeah. There have been so many songs about different issues, like, the gender equality or LGBTQ issues. But where are the songs about the climate crisis?
Maybe, Lina, that is something that you could give to us. Gabriel, you were also waving, didn't you?
Yes, Anna Maria has many good points, and I realize that I many times speak from a primarily Swedish perspective and high-income country perspective, but I would like to point out that the ways of organizing, the ways of influencing society that are used in many countries where you have an authoritarian government or living in a dictatorship could really be used in countries like Sweden as well. And I think that Greta Thunberg is really a good example of that. But because what is really Greta Thunberg? She is a modern Gandhi in many ways. And I think that what we are discussing now is really something that has been lacking, but will be of more importance to really create sustainability. And that is the personal sacrifice to reach a higher goal. And we have been living in a society where that the message has really been that you could influence corporations and so on by choosing other products, but you have never really been expected to sacrifice something. Just picking another product, you will still fulfill your needs. You have not sacrificed anything. And I think that what people really need to understand is reaching sustainability with all its benefits is also to sacrifice things that we take for granted today. And if people and the young people, they have understood that, maybe because they have the less to sacrifice. But I think that when people in en masse realize this, then we have really the foundations for new mass movements that will be crucial to reach the 2030 agenda. You know, non-violence, Gandhism, and so on. It hasn't been à la mode for quite many decades, but I think that we are really at a tipping point where those ideas and ideals will face a new spring.
Thank you. Do you think that we are up to sacrificing? I'm relating this to the pandemic situation that we are in the middle of. That's why this digital form, and we are not now traveling the way that we have been to business conferences, but also for pleasure. That is one sacrifice that has been debated. Is this something that we are going to keep to minimize our traveling in the future? What do you think?
Yes, I believe so. If I certainly believe that we will, but then we can debate: is this really a sacrifice? Because many people now find it quite relieving not to travel around the globe or not traveling to the neighboring city, and not at least speaking about traveling to the job. They find it very comfortable to sit at home and work because you have less stress, and that may be a new shift as well.
That could trigger a shift.
Well, that we will, you know, that we want to have more time, and we are willing to sacrifice money and status and careers if we have more time with our families.
So we believe in the good in people, realizing that this is a way for us to make that shift that is needed. Magdalena, I saw that you raised a hand. Is that still?
Yes, I could just add that while we see a lot of commitment and engagement in environmental issues, we should also recall, speaking of political institutions, as I earlier did, that when it comes to election day, the environment doesn't even make it to the top 10 issues that voters prioritize. So in terms of thinking about the long-term political decisions necessary to implement the 2030 agenda, I think we must bear that in mind when it comes to accountability. While the social aspects of the 2030 agenda, they come top of voters' priorities. So healthcare, education, equality, and social welfare, they clearly they are the top issues that voters prioritize at election day, and they of course are also a key part of the agenda. But just to bear in mind that it's not always that the environmental issues make it into election day.
Gabriel, you wanted a short comment.
Just a brief comment. That's precisely, Magdalena is pointing out, precisely why we need the 2030 agenda approach to sustainability. We can't just talk about climate change and the environment isolated. No. And that is what we have been doing for too many years. We need to link it, like we are doing in the agenda, to the social issues and of course to the economic issues. And because then we will have the force and the interest of people, of ordinary people, to make the changes that we really need to do. So I totally agree with you.
Okay, we go to a next question from the audience, and this is addressed for Ashley and Gabriel. As Oatly prepares for an IPO, that is an initial public offering, can shareholder financing be combined with the culture of responsibility that Gabriel spoke of, as shareholders tend to be profit-focused first? Who would like to go first, Gabriel or Ashley?
I can start. So first, I just say there's been no announcement or anything that we are going for an IPO. So I'll take this question hypothetically, because our CEO has said that is an option on the table for the future for us as we look at investment that we need in the future and the different options that there are. Two things I would see that are really promising in this respect. One, when investors choose a company like Oatly, they're choosing to invest because we are putting sustainability first. So that right there says, yes, it's absolutely possible for Oatly to retain its focus on sustainability, its culture, its values in this space, because that's what people are valuing when they come to us and want to invest. So that's number one. I think number two is, even more broadly in the financial sector, absolutely. I mean, we've only seen growth in environmental social governance offerings, ESG. We've only seen growth in impact investing, and we've seen sort of a rise in the consciousness among investors, among the firms that are pulling together the investment portfolios, about the value of these approaches and how it makes companies more resilient over time. And even some studies showing actually it makes those companies perform better. So during the COVID period, there's been some studies that have shown actually companies with sort of an ESG focus have performed better than companies without it. So that gives me confidence that yes, absolutely, we can maintain this focus, maintain these values as investment grows, as investment diversifies.
As being an associate professor in finance, I can say that there has really been a change, and we see the shift in the financial market. And we also, when we read the Green Deal, the EU Green Deal, and we see the financial gap that we now need to direct and accelerate towards companies that can reduce, not the least, the emissions. So that is something that is changing the financial market sector. Is that something that you also, Gabriel, has a comment to, the shareholder and also being too short-sighted?
Well, I have also seen, and there's of course many reports, as you know better than I, on this shift, and that is of course very positive. But looking into history, you could ask, why hasn't this shift turned up much earlier? You know, we have known about peak oil since 1956, but investments in fossil fuels has been skyrocketing for many, many years, long after 1956. And so I believe that, you know, markets, the idea of a market is really is really built upon the idea of perfect knowledge in some sense, and we must accept that we don't have this perfect knowledge, and so I am positive to what has happened recently, but I don't think that we could count on the markets to solve this problem entirely. We need to take into account that we have imperfect markets and that we really need a strong society to correct these imperfections. So that's really my answer.
Thank you very much for those very good answers. A new question here. There's more and more voices saying that economic growth is not possible with either social nor environmental sustainability, yet it's one of the goals clashing with many of the other goals. What to do? This is the million-dollar question. Who would like to go first? Anna Maria.
I don't know what to do, but I really agree that it's clashing with many of the other goals. And I work a lot with informal economy and with informal workers. And this goal of economic growth is put together with the goal of decent work. And what we have experienced is economic growth that does not lead to jobs, what they call growthless jobs. Jobless growth.
Yeah.
Sorry. And so it is really a problem. And I think that we honestly need to change our model and our structure of work and of production. Some ideas that are coming up, for instance, from the jobs perspective, are universal basic income. Others is reducing the working hour to 6 hours working day. Yes, so I think that we really need to rethink the way we have our society, because otherwise we are not going to even manage this one goal of economic growth and decent works.
Gabriel, you would like to comment here?
Well, one of the most competent finance ministers we have had in Sweden was actually, he had been a student in Lund, Ernst Wigforss. And
could you say that again?
One of the most
the Lund part, the Lund University.
Oh yes,
part.
he had been a student in Lund, and he always asked two questions about growth: growth of what and for whom. And I think that those questions are relevant today, and especially when speaking about the 2030 agenda. We have many parts of the world that desperately needs more economic growth. Then we have other parts where we need to redefine what economic growth really is. Today we were speaking about measurements before. Today we have GDP measurements where if people are breaking their legs, it will increase the GDP. But and that really points to why we need to measure economic growth in a different way, and with those two questions in always guiding our paths forward.
I think that is really something that we need to keep in mind. I think that we have one last question, and I would like to address all of you this question. Where do the panelists see the forefront and the most pressing need for more research connected to SDGs? And I would like short answers from you. Would you like to start, Anna Maria? Where should we focus our research interests?
I think there's trade-offs and the synergies and conflicts that are within the sustainable goals are important, and we should have more research on that to help us to understand how do we create this holistic approach so that we don't reach one goal and not the other. So understanding synergies, conflicts, trade-offs will help us to move forward to this holistic thinking.
Thank you. And Lina?
I think the interdisciplinary approach, cross-disciplinary approaches in research are really necessary, because a lot of these sustainability issues are complex, and they have ethical dimensions as well. So I think that is really very important, and finding a common language to address the goals and the research about it.
Relating back to your accountability project and the language understanding. Magdalena? What?
Well, as a political scientist, I would love to see more research on political conflict around the SDGs, and if eventually there will be party political debate around it in different countries, and what the role of parliaments can be in the long run, but also how goal conflicts are dealt with politically.
Thank you. And Ashley?
Yeah, for me, I think it's the intersection between sustainability and justice. and in particular, just transition. So not only thinking about what are the careers of the future, the sectors of the future, the approaches of the future, but what happens to the people who are in the careers, the sectors, and the approaches that we leave, and how do we support coal workers, mine workers, dairy farmers, beef farmers? How do we help them in this transition and make sure that they also have a place in the sustainable future?
Very good point, that we need to raise awareness when we are doing this transformation and these shifts in industries. And Gabriel, last but not least, do you have any?
Well, I think that my answer relates to all the other panelists' answer, but because I would say that we need more research on implementation, that we have so much knowledge, both when it comes to environmental change and when it comes to how to handle and strengthen the social dimensions and so on. But our knowledge is not reaching out to decision makers or to the ones that will make this transition happen or transformation happen. So we really need to find more ways and better ways of implementation of the 2030 agenda and the sustainability.
And when we have that research conclusions ready, then we know that we are going to address the research conclusions to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Forward them to me. I have my email address.
So, as you can see, we could have continued this discussion for many hours, but it's time to wrap up this panel discussion for today. First of all, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the panelists and audience for participating in this event. Thank you so much for contributing to an interesting discussion. I also would like to express my gratitude to Stina Johannesson and the Accountability Working Group for their hard work with organizing this event. Last but not least, please let me remind you of the blog, where you can access the documents from the Accountability Project at the Agenda 2030 Graduate School, as well as other insights provided by our Agenda 2030 Fellows. Thank you all.